today for what is it, the ninth of the top 10 interviews today. Been going really
You're going
strong.
through all of us, right? Right.
Right. How are you, John Kennedy?
I'm doing great. It's kind of exciting to. It's kind of. I was telling my wife, being in the room with all 10 of us. It's kind of like um, playing the game and cheering for the game at the same time, right?
It's
Because
pretty
we're all
fun, huh?
busy making the connections and at the same time, kind of cheering. I mean, we just made Amazon #1 bestseller in a couple of categories, which is pretty exciting. So yeah, it's
Yeah,
been a
there's
good
more
day.
than a couple categories, I happen to know.
That's great. That's great.
Uh, well, that's cool. It's really nice to meet you.
Me
Having
too.
worked in the background to bring these this book to the fore.
Yeah.
I get to read your chapters before I even get to meet you. So it's
Right. Well, I
very,
really
very cool.
appreciate what you've been doing. It's such a great team, behind everybody. It's been great behind
Thank
us.
you. It's a lot of fun. So your chapter is pretty fascinating. It's a simple model to improve your business, personal, and mental performance.
Right.
How do we do that?
Well, so you go back to my past. I mean, I tell a little bit of the story there, and long ago I found that, relying on processes is a very efficient way to make things happen. And through my career, I've been fortunate enough to be in situations where I have to come up with innovative solutions. And I found that my belief that innovation, it's not creation, but adaptation, right? We think it's creation, but it's not. It's adapting something that works in one environment to another. And so I found that very simple model of trying to get up to a defined process, regardless of what you do, can make it much more efficient. So it's consulting, like in the beginning with different businesses. I just gave a seminar on Tuesday called "Hack Your Habits," kind of like in the chapter in the book, where we using
Mhm.
applied neuroplasticity, we can change habits in less than an hour, as opposed to 6 weeks or 6 months. And then probably where that's been the most powerful is my work with the brain. That was back when the Marines gave me my contract in 2007. Applied that same model to our thinking processes using neuroplasticity, which is this amazing capability God's given our brains to change from stimulation as the basis. And you put them together, we can make some really incredible changes in mental performance very quickly.
Well, that sounds absolutely fantastic and really fascinating. Because and I noticed in your um, the description of what you had written about you. I think Maggie wrote this part. It was said that you work with the military, which you had just mentioned, but you also work with people that have PTSD and brain traumas. So how does that work? How does your process work?
Yeah, and it's interesting because we're so used to thinking in boxes, right?
Right.
That same philosophy that I use in my consulting, defining process, making more efficient. It worked regardless of what business I was consulting for: insurance companies, pharmaceuticals, a shipping company, and that same thing, because we're trying to target the critical processes and then define them and change them. Same thing with the habits. And we found with the brain, originally it was to improve performance going into combat. So Marines, snipers, Navy SEALs, pilots, helped them, but then when they were coming back, they suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, traumatic brain injury.
Mhm.
The same program actually helped them recover faster with no stigma. It's not a treatment. We just call them playing brain games. So they love that. They're able to do it with their families. They're able to do it as units. And so that's evolved now. I'm very fortunate. I get to work with really high performers, like professional athletes, business people. But the most rewarding work is the ones I do with, I have clients with cerebral palsy. You can use his hands again. A young, wonderful woman who has amnesia. She's getting her memory back. A young girl with a very severe
Wow.
concussion, different brain disorders, learning disabilities. And what I realize is it goes back to that same philosophy of targeting what we want to happen instead of worrying about what's not working. So I speak at medical conferences as well. And the typical approach is to find out what's wrong and try to fix it. But what I've realized from applied neuroplasticity is that if we just train the brain to do what it needs to do, our brains will rewire around any damage in its attempt to get to where it needs to. And the brain makes all the changes. I call them brain games. I take my clients through these very basic exercises that utilize what we call robust stimulation. So we target executive functions at the same time we target the parts of the brain that interface with the real world. So all those connections are made simultaneously, which is why some of the digital programs don't work so well, brain training programs, because they're very shallow. But we engage the parts of the brain that we need to use just in our life, whatever that is. Those connections get stronger and faster as well. And sometimes we can get changes in as little as an hour. It's really, I'm always blown away by what happens sometimes.
That is absolutely fascinating. So say even people that have had strokes and different things like that, the brain is still able to recover.
Yeah, exactly, because we're training the brain to do what it needs to do.
We need more of you.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that. I'm working on that. I'm working on a certification process, and I have two really, I think, brilliant companies that actually want to help me put this program out on a digital format. One is for business people, but the other one, Vivensity.com, is actually a program for high school kids to help them not help their academics, although this program significantly helps academics, but more their emotional regulation. And I'm excited. Thrive C60 is the other one. What I'm excited to do is actually be able to get this program out to so many more people, less expensively than just working with me. So
wow,
that's the goal.
Truly amazing. So could you give an example of some kind of
exercise? Well, we actually have two types. The one is we always start with this because it's designed to very quickly improve focus, faster thinking, and memory, because those are the skills that really underlie everything we do. And we start basically with a series of very simple symbols on a piece of paper. And it's interesting, that same exercise I start with a professional athlete or a business person or a child, even with learning disabilities, because our brains are working the same. We're trying to get the brain to make a decision. And when we make that decision, we start very simply, but then we make it a little bit harder each time. And all kinds of wonderful things happen in the brain when that happens. There's a little dopamine release, endorphins when you're done. People laugh when they're doing the exercises, they're having fun. And all of a sudden, 35 minutes later, I'll say, I bet you couldn't have done that when we started, right? And they all say, you're right, because the brain changes so fast. So that's all about making those decisions and getting down into what we call flow state. Some people will call that being in the zone. And one of our neuroscientists had said that we're actually creating flow state when you do these exercises, and people can actually experience that very quickly where they're thinking without thinking. The other type of exercise we use is a little bit more advanced, but it's basically a puzzle, and it has different types of pieces and then shape cards. And there's similar, like Tangelos, there's similar games out there. 99.9% of people, when I started with this, they solve problems the way we typically do, which is by trial and error. So this worked. And so it might take them 10 minutes to do the first one, and then they can't repeat it because they don't remember it. It's all trial and error. And so we train a very specific thinking process, break it down and think it through before you execute. So they start solving it in a very specific way before they ever touch the pieces, which is hard for most people, right? They always want to jump in and touch the pieces.
Jump in and do it.
But through repetition, and again, we're engaging, it's an analog interface, we're engaging all parts of the brain and body at the same time. Eventually they get to the point where they can look at the problem, they can solve it and then they can actually put it together sometimes in less than 10 seconds. And then that applies to work, applies to meetings, writing reports. I've had athletes tell me they can see where all the players are going to be before they get there, because we're training the brain this way, but then that kind of extrapolates out to our environment.
How amazing! So in your chapter, you talk about 20% of men and 31% of women, small business owners, reported that their mental health worsened in 2020 due to the pandemic and because of the uncertainty of it all. So how would these practices change it for them?
Well, one of the reasons that people are overwhelmed by that is because they're not used to having to change things so fast. When I speak at a lot of my business conferences, I do a workshop called Mental Agility Training. And the goal is not to teach you how to be agile mentally, but actually train your brain to be mentally agile so that as things come in, they can respond to them much better. What people describe is, actually we're trying to accomplish, is where the brain is thinking out here, so that by the time, if we're overwhelmed, right? But when our brain is processing in the unconscious, our conscious is much clearer to be able to make those decisions. And probably the most extreme example of that is a Olympic skier I trained a couple of years ago, where she said she could ski faster without falling because she could see the snow conditions further out. She's going 100 miles an hour down a hill. Her eyes are the same and the snow's the same, right? Because
Right.
she can process that further out front. She has that buffer. And the other reason that this is very helpful for, and I've worked with even a young 10-year-old boy with some anxiety issues from, because kids were all isolated as well.
Yes.
A lot of times we get anxious because we just can't think fast enough. And so when your brain is processing faster, you don't get that stress that comes from, it creates anxiety because you're much more calm. You're able to make your decisions. You have the confidence. Confidence is one of the big advantages of this program, because when you can start accomplishing things that you didn't think you could, it really improves your self-confidence.
Changes
Again, very
everything.
important for kids. Yeah. Oh, it's amazing.
Yeah.
I've worked with people with depression, and it's amazing how fast they've been able to recover as well.
That is simply fascinating. And I would imagine that if caught soon enough, even people with dementia or Alzheimer's can be helped through this whole
Yeah,
process. And
absolutely.
I've watched so many, even family members that have gone through, whew, it's just terrible
It's
to
hard.
watch that whole process. Yeah. Wow.
It is hard, and you're right. If you can catch it sooner and start this, you can actually prevent it. They've done some amazing studies. There's an Alzheimer's study. It's called the Nun study. If people want to look it up, and basically they spent some time with some nuns, and it was an easy study group because they were kind of self-contained, and they all donated their brains to science. So afterwards, they did autopsies, and they found that most of them had signs of Alzheimer's physically, because Alzheimer's, that plaque is what creates the problems, but very little manifestation in real life. And they surmise it's because they were so active doing so many different things that the brain was kind of rewiring around the damage, right? If you only have one way to process and that gets blocked, you're kind of stuck. But when you can have multiple ways to do that processing in your brain, then if one area is shut down, the other area can just get stronger. And that's kind of what we're trying to do for dementia and Alzheimer's as well, is again train the brain what it needs to do, as opposed to trying to fix any damage, and then let the brain do the healing itself.
Let the brain work, yeah. So I would imagine with something like what so many have faced, especially through COVID with depression, that in itself, if we could rise above that and have that tool set, it would make such a phenomenal difference.
Well, and one of the cause, unfortunately, of depression during the shutdowns was people that weren't able to do the things they were good at anymore, right? So now they have to completely adjust. They don't like maybe the digital. They don't like and so that's a huge adjustment. And that's where when we can start having the brain start to accomplish things it didn't think it could before. Then that confidence comes back, and the depression, instead of going down, their whole mood and behavior starts to go up.
How fascinating. That would be just so cool to be able to learn more about your process. And I think most of us that are busy running businesses and so on, we hey, bring it over here. I need that now.
Yeah. Well, and what I love about it is it's universal, right? So I'll work with executives, and they'll do better, make better decisions faster and so forth, but they'll also play better golf on the weekends, right? So that's good. And they'll go home and do the exercises with their kids. So it's really kind of a universal way for people to kind of improve themselves, together as a group, as a team, or as a family.
How beautiful. That's just simply amazing. Wow. We need more of you. Yep. That's what we do.
Well, thanks.
Well, I so appreciate that that you took the time not only to be in this book, but for this interview. And I know you're probably incredibly busy human being, but I would love to see how this project of getting this out into courses and see
I
how
hope
that
so.
would work. Yeah.
And my wife and daughter have also helped me. My wife has developed some programs for kids, which we want to try to roll out. And my daughter, what's interesting, I call her my first guinea pig, because she's 19 now. She's a sophomore at Hope College in Michigan. majoring in psychology and some neuroscience, right? So she's going to be very helpful. But I remember in the very beginning taking her through these exercises, which, you know, she did very well at. And then she actually was able to help me do some training for like some volleyball teams and some kids and so forth. So my goal is with the videos is to have them do some of them as well, because they each have their own knack that they bring to what we're trying to do.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for what you bring to the world. We so appreciate you. And
Well, thank you, Becky. This
yes,
has been great. Yeah.
this is awesome. So this is a real day of celebration. This is for the volume 5 of the Brilliant Breakthroughs series, Brilliant Breakthroughs for the Small Business Owner. Pick up a copy if you haven't already. Make sure you kind of pick up, actually read the whole thing. Yeah, but
Right.
each of the authors in this book have their contact information,
Yeah.
so that you can reach out to them if you find what they've said is useful for you. And thank you very much, John, for
Yeah.
what you've done.
Well, thank you, Becky, and
You
thanks
are
for all
amazing.
you're doing to help us get the word out to more people. I you know, everybody has said this, I know, but there's something about getting the different perspectives of so many people, and I'm learning so much from the other authors.
Oh, I know.
And so we can everyone's going to find something in that book that's going to help them.
Absolutely. I work with a lot of authors. I say I have the best job ever because I get to meet the most incredible people.
Right, right, right.
Awesome.
Well,
All
thank
right.
you.
We'll celebrate this day and go and
Yes,
enjoy.
it will. Thank you.
Thank you.